Hi everyone, welcome back. So, it occurred to me that I didn't really go into sufficient detail about the lore in my first devlog. Not necessarily my own, but the original game. I'm sure lots of folks have no idea about this Dune stuff. I know lots of y'all are from other circles, so let's start from the top today while we work on this new Railgun tank. And then I'll give you all some more info on the new vehicle. Once again, this is Dune 2000 by Westwood and Intelligent Games. It's an old RTS from 1998 that plays similarly to Command & Conquer, is essentially a remake of the grandfather of all modern RTS games, that being Dune 2, and it takes place in the Dune universe by Frank Herbert, of course. Sort of. The devs took certain liberties, you see. Anybody remotely familiar with Dune will know about the great houses Atreides and Arkanon, and maybe the scheming of the latter with the reigning Emperor Carino. You can put the stuff about Paul Atreides and the Fremen and all that to the side though. The story of Dune is less relevant than its universe to this game. And in this game, the important things are the spice melange is the most valuable substance in the universe, and 3 great houses fight over it. That's it. We might nod to the source material here and there. Dune 2000's cutscenes and aesthetic take inspiration from the David Lynch movie. However, there are a lot of digressions from the source material. For one, I said there are 3 great houses fighting over the spice melange. You might expect that to be the aforementioned Atreides and Harkonnen, plus House Carino, the one the reigning emperor belongs to, but nope. Instead, Westwood plucked the name Ordos from the Dune Encyclopedia and made them their own thing. To my understanding, the Ordos don't have any official lore or whatever, so Westwood did what they wanted with them because they wanted a third faction in their game, I guess. They got a lot more characterization over an Emperor Battle for Dune, a sequel to Dune 2000, but here in D2K they're just kind of a mercantile faction. They hire mercenaries, enjoy forbidden technologies. They're described as insidious. The Dune universe is full of political intrigue. And if you want more of that sort of thing, there are some relatively recent games like Dune Spice Wars, which is 4X RTS. In Dune 2000, simple though it is, they still did something of the sort in that vein. The Emperor Carino sits atop the throne, as one might expect in Dune, and he poses a challenge to the other great houses to harvest the most spice melange. Whoever produces the most spice wins his throne, or something. And then, oh noes, it's actually a trap to pit his main rivals in the Landsraad against one another, to weaken them. But it's okay, because you're the protagonist, and you defeat the Emperor's elite Sardaukar warriors after they back whichever houses you didn't choose to play as in the campaign. Hooray! That's the gist of how things go in Dune 2000, and for the purposes of this series, that's mostly what really matters. I say mostly because Dune is cool and we want to keep drawing on the source material to do more cool stuff, especially stuff that the original game didn't do. I mean, there are already lots of custom campaigns out there for D2K that do that, like CM Blast's Frank Herbert campaign, which attempts to translate the original story of Dune into RTS format. He also did up a Butlerian Jihad campaign, which involves the return of the thinking machines. That's been the subject of a couple of campaigns by now. Thalvan Flippy, who has also done mapping for Tiberian Dawn, involved an AI called Legion in his Great Battle of Arrakis campaign. I intend to do stuff with them too, because clashing with great machine armies sounds like it'd be cool. One of the meta reasons for thinking machines not being in Dune is because they distract from the human element. Frank Herbert understood the genre of sci-fi very well, and sought to explore the human condition through it. To that end, there was some centuries-long war in the distant past called the Butlerian Jihad, where mankind basically destroyed every quote-unquote thinking machine. Not just supercomputers, but like calculators and stuff. That way, we get to explore how humans react to the magic space drugs that make you able to think like a computer and stuff. Or something. Don't question it. Look, this isn't a proper lore recap of Dune or anything, okay? We're going on an adventure here. So remember to stay in drugs, eat school, and don't do vegetables, alright? Anyway, we don't have to completely eliminate the thinking machines from the picture to continue exploring the human element in the story. Putting aside what the source material did with them, let's say some of them made it out okay, and double back to those magic space drugs I mentioned for a minute. That'd be the spice melange, and it's so all-important in this universe because it mutates humans in favorable ways, expands life, grants some limited prescience, other stuff like that, and the guys who have a monopoly on space travel, that being the Spacing Guild, rely on that prescience from spice mutations to make sure they don't accidentally teleport their spaceship into the sun or something. Because of that, fighting over it in the original series is largely done through politics as opposed to open conflict. The spice must flow. If it doesn't, the whole Landsrod comes to a stop. So, having covered all that in the vaguest possible layman's terms, let's consider why the Spacing Guild would permit Emperor Karina to invite chaos to Arrakis in Dune 2000. Because Dune's a weird place where virtually everybody is exercising whatever leverage they've got politically to various ends, and even the Emperor of the known universe has to show some respect to the Spacing Guild. It blurs the lines between good and evil. It raises questions about the nature of power, asserts that it supersedes any one man. With the great houses itching to go to war in D2K, the Landsrod sounds like it could be a pretty chaotic place already. That's sad face for the Guild, who prefer order. So maybe they back the Emperor in his plot in order to stabilize things? In that case, even if the Emperor loses his gambit, the Guild still wins in the end, since the new ruling house will depend on them to do stuff. Let's say that's the case. Dune 2000 happens, and somebody other than House Carino comes to govern Arrakis. Where do we go from here? Emperor Battle for Dune, Westwood's sequel to Dune 2000, went on to portray the Sardaukar, Emperor Carino's elite soldiers, as an independent minor faction that would fight for the strongest house, because their Emperor is dead. But, the Emperor kinda started it in the first place with his little competition. The Sardaukar are pretty zealous, and I'd imagine the war for Arrakis would disrupt spice production. How much spice do you suppose the Sardaukar owe the Guild then? And more importantly, how could the house they serve, House Carino, possibly pay it back since they no longer control Arrakis? That's where this new idea starts. As I had mentioned in the last devlog, the Sardaukar owe the Spacing Guild a debt they can't repay. So what do they do with them? The Dune universe is full of morally grey factions, each badass in their own right, and seeing them all butt heads in an RTS environment is part of the fun. Not to mention how they interact is interesting to explore. The factions themselves can be characters in this kind of game. To that end, the original factions I devised, and the machines-inspired one, try to follow that sort of, design philosophy. The Guild in the original story of Dune plotted against the protagonist Paul Atreides because their navigator's prescience revealed to them that his powers would potentially endanger their position in the Landsrod. I won't spoil whether that ends the way they want it to or not for the unfamiliar, but it could be surmised that their prescience ain't perfect. If there are hypothetically thinking machines still around, those could pose a similar threat to the Spacing Guild, or to the known universe for that matter, so they could put the Sardaukar to use conquering the world they're hiding out on, under the pretenses of claiming that world for its resources so they can pay off their debt. As I said, Dune is all about the nature of power and how it supersedes any one man. I've gone on about the lore enough for now, though, so let's talk about how this theme applies to the factions in this upcoming campaign series some other time. Next time, perhaps. I hope the recap was helpful for those friends of mine unfamiliar with Dune, or Dune 2000 for that matter, or was at the very least entertaining in its own way. This tank we've been working on started off with this gorgeous new voxel by our resident voxel artist, Psycho. A real-life railgun uses magnets to propel a metal rod at super speeds, dealing damage through sheer kinetic force. This vehicle is thus not meant to have two barrels, these are just the rails for firing the weapon. But video games never do railguns correctly, so in this test footage the vehicle fires dual beams. We know it's incorrect, but who cares? Screw you. It looks cool. You wouldn't be able to see the projectile if it looked anything like a real railgun anyway. Nah, I might look at doing it the intended way later. Depends on a few things, This is pretty flashy, though. Anyway, this weapon behavior is a fresh addition to Dune 2000. It's still rough around the edges. We're looking at some way to implement friendly fire restrictions because the vehicle is highly impractical until friendly fire can be turned off. But I'm sure Klopcat can get something on that front sorted for us. He's the dev behind the editor and the scores of new features we've been enjoying. That said, it's not exactly balanced or anything in this test footage either. We haven't looked at balancing it. It's probably underpowered. This is just to showcase the new weapon behavior. I'd like to elaborate on the tech tree design and other stuff like that in some other devlog. I'll only mention the stuff relevant to where I'm thinking of putting this railgun tank. In the first devlog, I'd mused that the railgun tank might be nice as part of the Thinking Machines roster. We've gotten some other cool innovations since then, since things seem to move rather fast nowadays, like we implemented a biped walker mech inspired by the Atreides mongoose from Emperor Battle for Dune, the sequel to Dune 2000, and the Aether Knights are still missing a unit in an important place in their tech tree, so I'm thinking the railgun tank belongs there. I had made some changes to the tech tree in the past that justified the addition of a high-end armor unit. To be specific, harvesters were so ridiculously tanky in the vanilla game that players would often bring some along at the front of their attacks to soak damage. I nerfed harvesters, but added stuff like autogun tanks, which are extra thick, heavily armored vehicles with low firepower meant to play a similar role in engagements. But, you know, a unit actually meant for combat. Given that the autogun tank only has strong firepower against infantry, it's intended to provide support for other units that can dish out real damage to more important targets, like the long-range anti-armor missile tank. If we were to add the Railgun tank to the Aether Knights in a similar place in their tech tree, I'm thinking it'll be less tanky than the autogun tank, but its firepower and the way its damage pierces targets should allow it to hold the front very effectively, provided we do away with its friendly fire, of course. In its current state, it's too difficult to use. After that's sorted, by giving it a low firing rate, making it more expensive, and making it not quite as effective against infantry as it is against vehicles, we can make them vulnerable to being overwhelmed between shots and keep them at least somewhat reliant on the support of other units, like autogun tanks are. We don't want to make it an all-in-one spam me unit, you know? I gotta keep things interesting. It'll probably wind up being a good unit to spam, but the Aether Knight's MBT, or main battle tank, is hover tech that can traverse water. That terrain advantage has to be accounted for in mission design, as usual, to make sure spamming railgun tanks is suboptimal. If there's anything I've learned from past experiences in mapping and modding this game, though, it's that you can't put the player in a box. I don't mean that you shouldn't, I mean you literally can't. Those bastards will find any little loophole to screw up your totally perfect designs with the most immersion-breaking plays ever. It's better to just accept that they are the protagonist, and the worst you can do is encourage or discourage certain plays. This unit's voxel has quite a lot of little details. Many of them did not translate well to the raw frames, making it more challenging than the average unit to clean up. When working with sprites at this size, details like these are enormously important to get correct. They're the way a player is expected to distinguish between this unit and others. On the vehicle's body, I tried to ensure consistency in the strips of faction color on the sides, beside the guns, and above the rear treads. Those blue highlights on the back are very distinct and help the unit stand out, so those are important to maintain between frames as well. I tried to give the body some accents with its shadow as well, making them bigger and rounder at the front and back sides, and smaller between, while keeping the profile sleek and slim overall. It should look like a longer vehicle than the standard combat tank. Long boy. As for the turret, its faction color is in blobs on the sides and the back, so that wasn't too difficult to get sorted. The gray spots on top had too much contrast and got jumbled in translation, so rather than try to sort them too much, what I ended up doing was bringing them closer together in coloration. That way, it's not so obvious that they were jumbled. The rails had some important distinguishing features to maintain as well, those dull blue lines and such, and I added a bit more blue at their bases as a personal touch. This turret is asymmetrical too. The cockpit or viewport, or whatever you want to call it, is only on one side of the thing. I tried to make it bigger so it would stand out more. The result was, as you saw in this clip earlier, a very distinct unit that brings flashy rave lights wherever it goes. This faction may as well bring a party with them anywhere they go. Laser weapons, shiny shields, plasma cannons, and now railguns were added and have this kind of aesthetic. Yeah. So to wrap things up, here's a full rotation of the raw frames and a full rotation of the polished ones. Suppose they came out okay? I guess if they're being added to the Aether Knights unit roster as well, I do need to come up with one of those, a name that's a corruption of a Greek word. I haven't done any looking into that, no thought on that just yet, so, well, it's something for later. I have a lot more sprite work to do before we get onto actual mission design, but after the Saravan and the Railgun tank, it's all much less complex. Well, for the most part. I don't know how I'll approach cleaning up those walking mechs yet, they have so many frames. I think next time we'll start going over the design theory behind the example mission I put out. Arc Debut, as it's called, has been tested by a number of players who have made drastically different choices than I expected in some cases. All their efforts have been enormously helpful in figuring out what I'm doing right and what I need to give stronger consideration. We can talk more about the tech tree then. For now though, I think that'll do it for today. I will see you in the next one. Bye bye.